Hello, and welcome to the final day of the second annual WeVideo Creator Community Summit. My name is David Huerta, and I'm the President, Chief Strategy Officer at WeVideo. I want to thank you all for joining us today on this last day of the summit. To kick off today's events, we are very pleased to have someone who has been such a strong advocate and contributor to this community. His keynote today will focus on the importance of continuing to push new narratives forward in education. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce Google Certified Innovator and Apple Distinguished Educator, Ken Shelton.
Thank you. David, thank you for the intro, and it's a pleasure to be here. I get to bookend the event for everybody, so I hope all of you have had a wonderful experience over the last several days. I've been watching on social media, and so it looks like learning has not only been not only engaging, but also inspiring for those in attendance, as well as me when I was in the middle of travel, among other things. So what I want to do, I always start off with a reminder to everybody, especially for us in education. The whole idea around what my talk and what I'm going to share is also looking at where we currently are, where we were, and where I would hope that we would want to go. And I recognize that in order to do that, we have to do it together. And I'll share with you all a little bit more of that later. And so that's why I've actually normalized now before all of my talks, as well as workshops, is I always ask and encourage educators, are you engaging in effective strategies of self-care, because it's important. If you think in terms of education, we're in a giving industry. We give to our students, we give to each other ideally. And so in some cases, we all have to recognize that we have to give to ourselves. And so I love sharing this slide. If you are on a plane and they're going through the safety protocols, what do they always say? Put your mask on first before helping others. And I share that with you all because you can't pour from an empty cup. So I hope that this event has also been bucket filling or cup filling for you, so that you can take what you've learned and then now give to others. But I think it is important to recognize that, as I mentioned, self-care is not selfish. And so therefore, please make sure that you are engaging in whatever works for you to be able to hit the reset button with some degree of regularity. And so that leads me to the whole idea around this talk. And I really think, look, I think we as educators really need to engage in higher degrees of self-reflection, analysis, critical thinking, and what I would identify as critical support for growth. There's a lot of things that came up, especially pre-pandemic, right at the beginning of the pandemic, that I watched how many educators are like, oh, wow, this is something new. This is something new. And of course, my response is that it's only new to you because you're just now seeing it. And so for me, my thing and my pitch for all of us here is I would like for us to look at how we might, as an individual and as a community, develop a new ethos for education. So what exactly is ethos? It's a Greek word that translates to character, but more specifically, there's three areas. There's ethos, pathos, and logos. And so for me, the whole idea, and here's how I define those in the context of this particular talk, is for us to develop a new characteristic spirit of our community manifested in our beliefs and aspirations. It's one of the things I like to ask educators in regards to whatever their role is, whether you're a classroom teacher, classified staff, coach, site administrator, or district level, is what are your beliefs and aspirations of yourself? And how do those match the experiences that you want your students to have? Again, whatever your role is. And then now when it comes to the pathos, what are the feelings and where is your passion area within that? All of us have passions, ideally, and more specifically, I want to add on a side note, one of the things that I wanted to do when I was in the classroom that, believe it or not, posed a challenge was I would literally ask the students something as simple as, what are you passionate about? And the hesitation in many of my students, I think, was a byproduct of the fact that they had spent many, many years of their schooling constantly being told what they weren't good at and what they were incapable of, rather than identifying what are you passionate about and how might you use that passion to support your learning as well as that of your classmates. So the whole idea around building this new characteristic of our educator community is identifying what truly are our passions and what is our emotional investment aligned with those passions that supports the beliefs and aspirations of the community. And then, of course, you go over to the logos part, and that is, are we approaching it from a logical and reasonable perspective? Am I looking at it and saying, okay, here's what I'm passionate about. Now, reasonably and logically, how do I connect to that ultimately will support the new narratives or the new growth within the community? And so I'm going to share with you all a whole pitch in this talk around why is it important for us to really start to examine that? What are some of the cautionary areas, barriers, or obstacles that we want to be able to navigate over, around, under, and through to be able to get to that point. Because ultimately, a lot of what many educators have discovered over the last year has been around for a long time. And in fact, a lot of the things that have been touched on around inequities or disenfranchising experiences or things like that, those same experiences existed for me back when I was in high school in the 80s. So it's not new. It just might be new to some folks. And my whole thing is, if it's new to you now, great. Now, how might we work together to begin to see the change that we want in these areas? And so that's why it leads me to the following question that I would ask all of you on this slide. When it comes to learning, what experience do you want students to have? So we're going to eliminate all numerical measures of school. I just want to know, what experience do you want students to have? And now, not only that, how do your thoughts, your actions, and the environments that you create, if you will, how are they aligned with that experience? You see, in many cases, we know, and I believe it's an Einstein quote, we only measure what we value, and sometimes what's valued isn't measured. And I think when you start to ask yourself the question around this, what experience do I want students to have? It goes back to that triangle you saw. What experience do I want to have? So how am I emotionally invested in it? How am I logically and reasonably designing or incorporating environments or experiences that are aligned with that? And how does that create how would I describe the ethos? How would I describe the characteristic of the community of learners as a result of those two things? And that leads me to this. So I love sharing this as well, because this is a phrase from the Maa language, which is spoken by the Maasai tribe, which is in present day Kenya and Tanzania. And it's pronounced as Seria Nekera. The whole idea around this is that they ask themselves this in both socially casual conversations and formalized proceedings. And it loosely translated is, and how are the children? And this is a question I encourage all educators, especially leaders, but all educators, to ask yourself, align with our ethos. Any decision you make, any action you take, any learning experience you create, anything that you do should be, one of the questions you should and would want to ask yourself is, and how are the children? How am I judging my impact, or the impact of my actions and my words, not the outcomes and not based on my intent? And if you'll notice, that connects back to the other things, because the answer to this question touches on the logos, the pathos, and ultimately the ethos. I would also add the following. Part of recognizing the importance of our experiences and the characteristics of our community, and especially educator community, is aligned with the metaphorical representations I'm going to share with you all now. And they are the following: the mirrors, the windows, and the sliding glass doors. So for those of you that may not be familiar with this, this is generally referred to when it comes to literature and English language arts. And the whole idea is that as a learner, I should be engaged in, I should be given or provided the opportunity, if you will, to engage in a learning environment or learning experience that serves as a mirror. In other words, I see myself reflected in the content, and I see it from an affirming perspective and an authentic voice. It helps me better understand who I am as an individual. And then even going back to that triangle, it helps me become much more emotionally invested in the learning. I can logically and reasonably connect to that learning. And then now, what does it do for the characteristic of that learning environment? So that's the mirror. The window, once I have the mirror and I have a better understanding and sense of self, I now can engage in learning endeavors that serve as a window, which means I'm learning about something that is identifiable as other persons, other experiences, whatever other is that isn't aligned with my own cultural identity and lived experiences. I can now identify with that. And I would argue that part of being able to do that is aligned with what I always say is a basis for a really strong cross-cultural connection and cross-cultural communication. Because if I better understand myself, I now can connect the lived experience of somebody else or of another to mine, which means that I now can identify what are the more things that we have in common than we don't. How is your perspective likely to be different than mine based on your lived experience? And I would even argue that when you have strong and clear windows, that's the way to build more sustainable pathways towards social empathy and enduring compassion. And then the last one was a sliding glass door, which ultimately is, and I engage in a learning endeavor that allows me to put myself into the shoes, if you will, of another. But because I have the window and the mirror, I'm now going to have a much more critical understanding of how that experience is different than mine. Now, it's generally referred to in English language arts and literature. My argument is that mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors should be across the board. And so I'm going to share with you all a prime example of that. So I recently traveled and spoke at an event for a school district, and I shared in my slide deck, one of the slides I had was a picture of me in the 8th grade science textbook. And I had a whole story around how that really increased my awareness. Just that picture alone increased my awareness around some of the things I was doing early in my educator career. So I'll give you all, it's not in this slide deck, but I'll give you all a synopsis of it. And ultimately, I'm smiling with students in a science class or science lab in that book. And the epiphany I had was a student pointed out to me that I was smiling in that textbook, but yet for the first few months of school, I was not smiling in class. Because I was always told, don't smile until Christmas. And you see, even that ties in with this keynote. Like we gotta interrogate some of the things that have been what I call habits of mind and cultural norms that don't align with the impact that we want to be able to have in our learning environments. So at any rate, I do that in the keynote. So then I'm doing a whole workshop for the entire district leadership. And I was looking around the classroom, I look up at the wall and I see this up on the wall. And so I'll zoom in on it. Because that's me, and that's a modeling job I did quite a few years ago. It's been at least 12. And so I included that in this talk because of two reasons. One, think about what that does for the mirror. If you're a young Black male student in that classroom and you see me on that wall, and that's why I love the caption, can you see yourself here? So for me, my response, as a matter of fact, I can. But the main point there is, that was an ad campaign for the healthcare industry, for health professionals that didn't include doctors. So that one right there was being a flight nurse. So there is a mirror for me and any other Black male student who's in that class. They see that, they're like, oh, that looks like me. Wait, he's a flight nurse there. Maybe that's something I could look at doing if I like the medical or the healthcare industry and I want to pursue something like that. The window is for someone who doesn't look like me to say, oh, I didn't know that. He's a flight nurse. And even the gal that was next to me, I don't remember her name now, but the same thing there. Now, the sliding glass door could be aligned with, okay, what are my experiences with my doctors or in the healthcare industry? How many different representations have I seen? Are those aligned with affirmations for me or give me a window into others and why they pursued that type of a career or something along those lines? And so my main point in sharing this with you all here is, remember, I first referenced books and literature. This is in fact, if I remember correctly, this class is part of a CTE program for students that want to pursue certifications in the healthcare industry. That again, they don't necessarily want to be a doctor, but they want to work in the healthcare industry. And so I shared that. I thought it would be good to put that in here because, again, the mirrors, windows, sliding glass doors is generally referred to in literature, but as you all see, it's not limited to that. And I still love the caption. Can you see yourself here? Yeah, I can. And I will say the funny thing is, no matter how long ago it was, at least I can honestly share with you all, I haven't lost any more hair than what I had at that particular time. And so I share that because you all were asked a question leading up to this event, and it was kind of crowdsourced on what were the thematic areas that you wanted to look at or you wanted to experience and learn about in this particular event. So I put together a series of slides that I want to share with you all to try to connect the dots aligned with our new narrative. So many of you had submitted that you wanted a thematic area to be on SEL, social and emotional learning. We need to look at our social and emotional health in the context of our learning environment and things like that. Then, of course, get into student engagement. I actually would argue, just on a side note to share with you all, that if I'm invested in my learning, then I'm going to be engaged. And the key for me with student engagement is how are we providing the mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, and especially from an inclusive and culturally affirming perspective. If I know that what I'm engaged in my learning is real and relevant to me, and I have representations that serve as that mirror, I'm a lot more likely to be invested in it because I can connect to it. And then continuing on, many of you have mentioned equity. Equity is a big deal. I define equity simply as access and opportunity. How are we ensuring that there is access and therefore opportunity for the learning? Then you connect it to the blended learning. How are we engaging in learning opportunities that are both synchronous and asynchronous that ideally all require the use of technology, but they still are aligned with what I call learner empowerment. And then once you do that, what about the deeper learning, which I'm going to connect to all of these shortly in just a moment. And then some of you put differentiated instruction, which I will share with you. I define differentiation as increasing the complexity relative to the learner and the content. And then the last one, of course, was personalized learning. How am I personalizing that? I added one more puzzle piece to your thematic approach that I think kind of captures all of them, and that is the following: learning culture. So go back to ethos, characteristic or culture of a community. What would you describe as the culture of your learning environment, and how does that tie in? So before I put these all together, what you all did with those themes is kind of along the lines of a concept that I've been doing a lot of research on and a lot of reading on, and that is targeted universalism. So we have a universal goal or a universal thematic approach, but then we target where the needs are most dire or the highest degree of needs are, as well as the goals that are based on both an individual and even in some cases subgroup perspective. So I think all of those are all pieces to the same puzzle. Can you connect those? If my SEL needs are met, then my brain is now no longer in survival or endurance mode, it's in learner mode. Because of that, ideally, I'm going to be invested and engaged in. Now you're going to make sure that I have the access and opportunity based on resource distribution. I'm also going to be in a position to where learning is not only, there's a contrast in my learning. Some cases I'm synchronous and active with the teacher or my classmates. Sometimes I'm not. I'm kind of on an individual basis. As a result of that, I am pushed to, encouraged to, supported to, and my teacher is operating from a degree of one of the characteristics of a critical consciousness, which I'll share, to engage in deeper learning. And then as a result of that, it will involve me having elements of differentiation, which means it gets more complex. As a result of all of those things, I now feel that my learning opportunity within the context or the content area has now been personalized to me because I've been affirmed, my needs have been met, I've been appropriately challenged, there's been a contrast in the way in which I engage in the learning, and all of that connects to the overall culture of the learning environment. One of the things that I think is critical for this to add that you all may not have put in here, but I know you all think about it and you know it's important, is the whole idea around creativity. I would argue that if we have well-designed learning opportunities, that creativity is the core basis for that learning opportunity, which means that we are making sure we have the right access and distribution of resources. We are doing it in ways that again are aligned with differentiation, blended learning, and personalized. I would argue that creativity kind of can encapsulate all of these puzzle pieces. And so I want to share with you all a quick story on why creativity is important, and especially from an SEL perspective. So during the pandemic, when we were on full-blown lockdown, my default was to check in on many of my friends that are in education. And again, going back to the ethos, who's in my community, who's in my circle. And on a side note, it reminds me of a Nipsey Hussle quote, which isn't in this particular talk, that if you look out at the people in your circle and you don't get inspired, then you don't have a circle, you have a cage. So one of my sources of inspiration, support, and validation is the gentleman you see here, and his name is Al Thomas. So I had reached out to Al and I'm like, we should do something for our community because we're all on lockdown. And he and I both know that creativity, when you engage in a creative endeavor, it not only supports your mental health, but depending upon the endeavor, I would argue it could even support your physical health. And some abstract platitude, I mean literally like an endeavor of which you are empowered to be able to represent your understanding, and then your creations. And this is why I do encourage, again, if we're having new conversation, I encourage educators to not include creativity as a component of grading because creativity is subjective. Now, with that being said, I share this slide in here because Al has that t-shirt. And we did a few activities last April and May that we were like, okay, here's a thing that we will both identify as creative. And then we did it in a way that, yes, it could challenge you, but we also had a criteria that could be differentiated. You could go deeper, and all of those things that you saw on that particular puzzle piece, or the puzzle pieces that were put together. And then, of course, we encourage folks, utilize the resources that you directly have access to in the home. And so I share that because part of our ethos should be, who are we looking at as a colleague, as another educator that serves as a source of inspiration, ideally catalyst for creativity, but more specifically around support. And so then, of course, I share myself in here because Al actually designed this shirt too, because in the context of many of the conversations we've had, we've identified, so going back to the pathos or passion, we both, along with our very close friend Dee Lanier, we all have a major passion for coffee. And so I'm sharing this with you all because our passion area was coffee and our approach to education. But as a result of our ethos with the three of us, if you will, we recognize the need and the importance of supporting each other around engaging in creative endeavors, being affirming to each other, and then what are we doing to share that within the context of our educator community? And that leads me to a cautionary thing I want to share with you all, and that is the following. So there's a lot of jargon that is in education. And I have some of it listed here. And my whole thing with educators, if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. And so I say that because a lot of this jargon I associate with a word salad. It's what I always say is jazzy jargon. It means nothing outside of relevance and context. And when you throw out innovation, or you throw out high expectation, you throw out disruptor, or throw out thought leader, throw out this, what does that even mean? And I want to know, what does it mean in regards to within context and within relevance? And I'll share with you all a couple of these here as an example. I hear innovation used a lot in education. And I always follow up with, okay, so how do you define it first? That's how we got to start. We got to start off with a common definition. And then more specifically, what does it look like? And in all of the work that I do, there's a couple of things. I think innovation, from my perspective, first of all, just because it's new or different doesn't mean that it's innovative. To me, one of the most critical things that in order to have something that I would identify as innovation is you got to have necessity. And in fact, innovation is the first cousin of invention. And there's an old saying, necessity is the mother of all invention. And so when I hear innovation, I always ask, how are you differentiating innovation from new or different? And even when you go to disruption, if you look at disruption, even think in context of a classroom, if a student is disruptive, they've made a temporary, and that's the key word, temporary change to what's going on, and then you go through a process to reorient or redirect back to what you were doing. I don't think disruption goes far enough with a lot of things. I think we need to really look at how do we dismantle and abolish things? Because disruption means, oh, there's a change, but then now we're going to go back to the way things were. And so that's why I share with you all, really start to ask yourself the questions around a lot of that jargon that is used. What does it mean in context? And then I think it would be appropriate to ask ourselves and even ask speakers, what's your proof of concept and what are your receipts? You see, otherwise, if we just continually get inundated with jargon and even a lot of acronyms, a lot of the dialogue I have with communities, with a lot of school districts I work with, a lot of the families are like, okay, well, what does this acronym mean? Well, what is this one? This one. And ultimately, for me, it's like, well, why don't we go back to what the core purpose of what we're doing? It's all around the learning experiences that we design and that we want to ensure for our students. And so I go back to our reference because ideally now you all can connect. Ethos is our characteristics of our community. Now, how do we get to that point? We look at the logos and the pathos that are associated with that. And I think one of the core ways for us to be able to do that is to really start to develop higher degrees of a critical consciousness. So I'm going to share with you all some of the characteristics of this and then a final call to action for all of us as a community going forward. And so they are the following. So ultimately, one is operating from a degree of humility. I'll ask all educators this: when and what is the last thing you learn from your learners? And if you can't answer that question, then you have to ask yourself, am I operating from a degree of humility? Am I recognizing that part of the building of a relationship is that learning is not transactional, it's relational. And so therefore, what am I learning from my students? And then conversely, obviously, what are they learning from me? And now go back, connect to that triangle. How am I tapping into their emotions around the learning, their reasoning and logic around the learning that characterizes the community that I'm within? And then continuing on with hope. And I don't use hope here as a mindless platitude. I mean hope in an asset and affirmation perspective. There's a lot of money in deficit thinking, a lot. If you think about it in terms of many learners, they will go through their entire K-12 and in some cases higher ed, and in some cases, which I can cite to that, if I had time, I could share with y'all a story. Even when I was in grad school, the constant barrage of what I call deficit terminology. You're incapable of this. You're not good at that. You need intervention for here. You're performing below standard here. Rather than focusing on, well, let's look at what are you passionate about and what are you good at? And then what I used to always ask my students is, I want to identify what you're passionate about. And then now adding to that, how might you use whatever skills are necessary aligned with your passion to support the growth of your learning in our learning environment? And how might you share those with your classmates? Because my whole thing is advance individual and group learning. Rising tide lifts all boats. And continuing on is the faith around autonomous empowerment, meaningful learning, even the building of trust. You know, it goes into the whole idea around, do we share with our learners? I have engage in this learning opportunity, take the necessary risks for growth. My response will be aligned with the hope and the humility, by the way, and that will lead to higher degrees of a sense of self-worth, as well as build stronger foundations to relationships. And by the way, all of these are connected to those puzzle pieces you all saw, which I have another slide to share that. And then continuing on with the love. Do your words and actions demonstrate a degree of authenticity to where you have a true, genuine care for and care about your students? In fact, I should have put on a slide, empathy and compassion. And by the way, remember I shared pathos? Well, guess what? One of the words that's a derivative of pathos is empathy. So with that being said, there's the love. And then the last part of our critical consciousness is the critical thinking aspect. Are we connecting the learners to their interests? Are we utilizing local context, local resources, local references to build the connection for our students or our learners to identify the content area and its relevance to their lived experience, and then looking at it from the bigger picture? And these all tie in with the characteristics of building a critical consciousness. And it's my hope for all of you that these will be a catalyst for you to think in terms of how might I be a different and better version of myself as a result of new information or a new perspective on things. That's why I said new narratives in education. If it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. And sometimes we just don't know. And that's why I share this quote with you all from one of my personal heroes, Maya Angelou. You do the best you can until you know better. But then when you know better, you do better. When introduced with new information, are you taking it in, processing it, reflecting it, and then now your tangible, actionable actions as a result of that are going to make you a better version of yourself as a result of that? We can only hold ourselves accountable to the degree of things that we know. My thing is, as educators, how are we engaging in endeavors that force us to think outside of our own perspectives, our own lived experiences? And in fact, this is one of the reasons why I share with educators, if you were to do an audit of your social media feed or something like that, what story is being told? Are you getting a replication of your own thinking, or are you getting exposure to new and different perspectives and experiences? And that even connects back to the whole thing around the pandemic, with folks saying, oh, this is new. I didn't know this. I didn't know this. And I said, well, that's probably because you don't have a PLN or you don't have a circle. You have a cage. This is not new for a lot of us. Or further to that point, all of that jargon. Well, it's this, it's this, it's this. What does that even mean? What does that even look like? Why is it, for example, with me, why is it that I can go into certain school districts that serve, let's say, a high population of students that look like me, and rarely ever do I hear the words creativity and innovation used with any degree of regularity? Why is that the case? You think about it in terms of the name of this event, the Creator Community Summit. You all are a community of creators. How might you create mechanisms, opportunities, experiences, learning opportunities for us as a community that trouble the narrative? We have to do that. If it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. And that leads me to the whole idea around change, because I think this is one that I was dying to share with you all. So When you think in terms of something like the word disruption, as I shared, the key with disruption is that is a temporary change. You really got to look at the interrogation of many of our institutions and our systems that lead to the predictability of outcomes and the predictability of success. Listen, education reform has been around pretty much as long as public education has existed. And the whole idea, I share the slide with you all, is the whole concept of what's called gradualism. It's like, well, we want to change, but we're going to do it in slow incremental components. For those of us that have been around educational technology for a long time, have you all noticed how quickly, given the pandemic, all of a sudden we got to get devices into the hands of students, we got to get hotspots. Oh, wait a minute. Why is it that my students don't have broadband access? By the way, that's been going on for a long time. And it's called digital redlining. Whole different talk to give. But my whole point here is it reminds me of a quote from the late Thurgood Marshall when he was making arguments around the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision. And what was happening? Oh, you need to be patient. We're making change. We're just going to make gradual change. And he even says, you know, I do believe in gradualism, but I think 90 years is we've been patient enough. And so for me, I would look at what we're doing with a degree of urgency around what exactly is it that I'm doing as a learner, as an educator, whatever my role is, and how is that aligned with the ethos that I believe in as part of my community. And then ultimately, the answer to that question I shared at the beginning, the experiences I want my students to have. If I could wave a magic wand, we would not be able to predict the outcomes of our students. We would be able to look at it and say, okay, my focus is on the experiential part of learning. And then ultimately, I always share with school leaders, the goal should be not graduation rates, test scores, college going, or any of those things. One, it should be an options going culture. And number two, to me, the goal should be that by the time a student finishes their K-12 experience, and even quite frankly, their higher ed experience, that they can describe their learning experience as, you know what, for all of my learning, I will say the following: I felt seen, I felt heard, and I was loved. And you remember, all of those are aligned with those characteristics of a critical consciousness. So when you connect all of these pieces to the puzzle, ultimately for all of us, it's how do we look at the interconnectivity between all of these from a universal standpoint? And then how is that aligned with us developing new narratives and a new look, a new characteristic of our community? Because I will share with you all, we have to do it as a community. No sustainable shifts, changes, or quite frankly, abolishments of things have occurred in isolation. And we have to coalesce around a common goal, a common purpose, a common need, a common love for each other, a common support, which is affirmation, to recognize that the longer we allow the mindless platitudes or the minor disruptions to occur, then the predictability of success will remain there. And I do think that that's why I shared the story about Al. I do think that creativity is one of the catalysts for us to do that. But I also think having a genuine love for each other, a genuine support for each other, and keep in mind, support isn't just the positive, it's for growth. It's for growth as well. And I don't mean the opposite of positive. I know can be negative, but to me, it's more around asking the right questions and challenge each other around, you know, what does that look like? What does that mean? How does that translate to the experiences that we want our learners to have? And if we do all of that together, I do believe that we can build a new ethos for education. So I want to thank you all for the opportunity to spend this time with you. I want to thank my WeVideo family for essentially giving me this platform to be able to share thoughts about all of these things with all of you. I'm rooting for you. I'm cheering for you. We're in this together. And I'm going to leave you all with one of my favorite Swahili proverbs as well. If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. We are a community. We want to have a new ethos, and we want to go far so that way we can see the shifts that are necessary, and they are both impactful and sustainable, aligned with the experiences that we want our learners to have. So thank you all so much, and I believe I will hand it over to Jeremy now.
Woo! That was awesome. Thank you for that illuminating talk and all you do to rally educators and keep us motivated and inspired to fill our cup like you described. I'm Jeremy. I manage the WeVideo Creator Community, and I just wanted to hop on to welcome everyone again to day 3 of the WeVideo Creator Community Summit. We have awards and giveaways coming, but first you can head over to our networking tables that are active now and meet other attendees. Thank you again, Ken, and I hope everyone finds inspiration today. Have a great one.